Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamario, Global Supply Chain Practice Head for Morgan Phillips Executive Search. Specializing in global board level and executive search, my job is also to connect you with worldwide experts, thought leaders, entrepreneurs and executives in all things supply chain. Today it is my pleasure to have with us Paul Srivorakul, who is basically the CEO of aCommerce. Paul has a very extensive and global background, being born in Thailand and raised in California. He got his BA in anthropology at the University of California Berkeley in 2000, but caught the internet bug early and got a sales job at ask.com in the US. Together with his brother, who was back at that time working at Apple, they both decided they wanted to become entrepreneurs. So they quit their jobs, moved back to Thailand to look for opportunities and decided to focus on online advertising. With a credit card debt, they managed to fund the startup New Media Edge in 2006, and which went on to be acquired for about 8 million. Even while running New Media Edge, they started a second firm, an ad network business, AdMax, in 2007, which they ended up selling it to the Indian firm called Media in 2012 for 36 million. Paul started his third venture, Ensogo, in 2010 after seeing the Groupon phenomenon in the US and selling it to the US social media firm Living Social in October 2012 for an undisclosed sum. But also earlier in 2012, he had already launched Advent Capital in Thailand to seed e-commerce firms around Southeast Asia, and basically this also sparked his idea to start aCommerce. 5 years later, today, aCommerce is the leading e-commerce service provider in Southeast Asia, bringing brands and retailers online to reach consumers in the world's fastest growing markets, which are basically the markets in Southeast Asia. And in the most recent funding round in November 2017, aCommerce raised more than 65 million. And now boasting 1,400 staff, 5 countries and 9 fulfillment centers. So it's a pleasure to welcome you here with us, Paul, and to find out more about aCommerce, about the story and your journey so far.
Sure, thanks for having me. So for us, why we started aCommerce really was from the background that we were in, which was in media and advertising and e-commerce. And when you look at, why this background was so relevant for aCommerce was, aCommerce today, we're an end-to-end e-commerce enabler. And so we help brands, retailers really with everything from marketing, content, all the way to retail and logistics and what we call end-to-end. And really, we provide this across 5 different markets: Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia. From the previous businesses, when you think about a funnel and you think about at the very top, there's media, and then there's advertising. And then from that advertising, what do people want to do? Click to go purchase e-commerce. But the biggest challenges that we faced in Southeast Asia was the logistics piece to be able to execute e-commerce. And so, for the first 3 previous businesses was really in the top of the funnel, right? And what we discovered was that, e-commerce, as we were building the Ensogo, the daily deals business, as we looked at how do we start to work, pivot to a marketplace like Snapdeal or like Coupang in Korea, right? We really stumbled onto a very difficult problem, which was logistics. And that was around 2012. And so this is really why, we built aCommerce was, number one, we wanted to solve the logistics problem, specifically B2C fulfillment and last mile delivery. And we figured that once we solved that we could basically, move up the value chain all the way up to the demand generation, right? Which is marketing, content, and retail, right? So aCommerce really started out first with looking at how can we help, our existing portfolio of companies we invested into with their logistics needs. Mm. And from that, we realized that, look, not only did the companies we invested in via Ardent Capital needed logistics, but we actually started to get a lot of brands and retailers asking us, can you help us with logistics? And we can help us, with end to end. And that was really, the beginning of aCommerce was, we built it from a real need from not only our existing portfolio of companies, but actually also, brands and retailers.
Interesting story. So, it's almost like you stumbled across a need, right? Whilst investing in other companies, then you realize, okay, this is something that is not addressed. You kind of scratched your own itch, and then you found gold at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, exactly. And the guys that we were investing into, we actually set up Ardent Capital, which was really aimed at e-commerce. And we were funding about 12 different plus companies in the e-commerce space. They all had the same problem, logistics. And so as we, either you kind of fund these guys to build their own logistics, which were, kind of 20-year-olds, right? Or, we as a group would actually help provide that. So we were dabbling in it first until we realized how big that opportunity could be. But actually, it required also a lot of resources. And so that's where we, decided to, I guess, triple down on to really be able to provide that infrastructure out here.
Yes. Maybe tell us a little bit some of your key clients, because I think some of the case studies with your clients, because I think you work from really big brands in terms of bringing them to market here in Southeast Asia as well as smaller. So maybe you can give us a big brand or smaller brand,
sure,
regional brand example.
When we first started, we were working with a lot of different startups. We were even supporting some of the big marketplaces like Lazada, the big retailers. Today, we really focus on more of, kind of Fortune 500 brands. So, when you think about, the FMCG category, whether it's Unilever, Procter & Gamble, L'Oreal Group, so really across everything from Johnson & Johnson. So a lot of the big brands that really, are trying to, just reach the, multi-channel, reach multiple different channels. So we do everything from doing the marketing for them, building the brand site, putting them on marketplaces, helping them with the customer service, all the way to fulfillment, warehousing, order management, all the way down to delivery, right? So we do the full end-to-end. So some of these brands that, FMCG, for example, we work with also electronic brands, Philips, Samsung, and HP as well. So really, quite a different range. We tend to cover, the top 4 categories, FMCG, health and beauty, fashion, as well as electronics. And in fashion, for example, we work with clients like Adidas. And,
yes,
Adidas in Indonesia, as we localized, their site, to adidas.co.id, when they first started, they were just generating I would say probably 5-digit GMV a month, right? And in terms of revenues, right? So how much they were selling, and we would basically 10 times that, right? Grew that business 10 times in less than 6 months. Right. Wow. By just localizing for Indonesia, meaning local content, local currency, delivery times within 2 days. Right. And so this is where, I think a lot of brands that localize in each country, especially countries like Indonesia, can really reap the benefits. And that's what we provide, which is the kind of the full end to end. For clients like L'Oreal, we work with them across the region. And why the value of end to end is really that it's not just, you work with one vendor, right, that can basically provide all these services for you, but rather that the data that you collect is actually, you're able to centralize all of that data and capture, right, that data under one platform. And so for us, we have what we call an integrated unified commerce system that allows you to be able to track and manage everything from your marketing to your retail all the way down to logistics. And what that really means in general is, for example, clients like L'Oreal, when they change their marketing or their banner ad from red to pink, for example, we can show L'Oreal that, from just changing the color or changing the text on their ads, what did that yield? What was the return in member sign up, first time buyer, activating a dormant buyer, right? Repeat buyers. What payment did they use? Credit card, bank transfer, COD. It's 5% is actually from phone orders, right? And we can show them as well in, what the SKUs, the level of what's selling well. So long tail of their products, 40% is actually coming from long tail, which are products that aren't available offline, all the way down to a heat map of basically where their sales are coming from by geography. Right. So what the end-to-end data allows you to be able to provide for a client is, for every ad that they do, you can show them there's increased sales in this specific city, in this demographic. And that kind of level of data isn't really available currently in the offline world, right? And this is where online is, incredibly valuable to be able to provide that level of granularity. So as companies invest more in advertising, they're immediately able to see the yield and the return on those ads.
No, but that's incredibly important, because everybody in today's world is after data, is after clean data, to be more precise, right? And they want to see what's my ROI, right? So finally, there's some way in which you can determine basically people like yourself can give them that accurate data. As you said, it in a supermarket, it's very difficult to kind of trace and track what happened. So that's quite impressive, actually. And the fact that you've managed, like Adidas is a good example. If you manage to 10x their revenue within a span of 6 months, that's pretty. And also, based on our knowledge of Southeast Asia, each of the markets are quite localized and are quite unique, right? And if you are able to give the consumers that individual localized experience, they're much more likely to buy it.
Yes,
so that's a big
and the dynamics of each market. I mean, obviously, for example, like Singapore. I mean, just Singapore itself, 70% of all the orders that's come from Singapore are from cross-border overseas, right? Where I would say Thailand and Indonesia are much more local, and the basket size in Thailand really averages around say $30. But in Indonesia, it's half of that. And even in the Philippines, it's very similar to Indonesia, right? So what that means is that, when you basically, do e-commerce in these markets, you have to, depending again on what category, what vertical that you're in, right? That you have to think about bundling your products. So it makes sense that at a unit economics that, allows you to, actually make money even when you add on the delivery cost, the fulfillment cost, and etc. So the ability to bundle is incredibly important. And in fact, probably half the revenues, I would say, in our business is really around being able to bundle products together, because, the cost of delivering that, as in Indonesia, right, it's incredibly expensive with the tens of thousands of islands or in the Philippines. And so in those markets, bundling is such an important feature in e-commerce.
Yes. Let me ask you this. I mean, you basically you exited several regional startups. Now you're running, or you still have your venture capital fund. You're running aCommerce.
Yeah.
You're kind of working on both sides of the table, aren't you? So what's your favorite role and why?
I actually realized I wasn't a good investor, right? Because, for me, I would be kind of, immediately trying to go on the other side of the table to help the entrepreneur go, okay, this is how you should be actually fixing it and doing it, or et cetera, right? And I felt that, I still had some years in me to really, I still had the passion to build. And to this day, I still actually prefer to build than to invest, right? And really, Ardent Capital, we put that, the 20 million to work. And really, my focus today is 100% in aCommerce, but I do still make angel investments. Just roughly around 4, even in the last year. And I invest into areas that I see, because we're, pretty deep in terms of being able to see kind of the trends, right? So, invested into a company called Helpster that was actually, we were outsourcing, it was on-demand staffing for blue-collar workforce. And, we needed staff immediately for warehousing. And these guys said, look, we can get you on-demand staff. Boom. And that was such an interesting, value proposition from Helpster. And that's why we invested, was because we knew that it wouldn't be just us that needed this solution, but many other companies across the region. So that's how I tend to invest from a personal perspective. But, for us as aCommerce, we started the business in 2013. And now, as we're growing across the region, we obviously, for us, just very much laser focused on Southeast Asia, and actually going very deep, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of people think that e-commerce is just B2C to consumer, right? And B2C to business to consumer is still fairly young in these markets. I mean, as the market's evolving. In fact, Southeast Asia actually evolved from C2C first. Think, Facebook kind of classified sites, right?
Country and whatever. Yeah.
Correct. And that's majority actually of Southeast Asia. But now B2C is starting to unfold. And of course, the next one is B2B, right? But when you look at more mature markets like, Korea, like China, right? B2B is actually, 70 to 80% of the market. right? Where C2C is much smaller. So, we're actually evolving reverse in Southeast Asia. So for aCommerce, when we actually help a brand, for example, like Unilever or Procter & Gamble, these guys, we're not just thinking, how can I help you from a B2C perspective? We actually, we look at what we call B2All, right? Yes. Which is whether it's a B2C, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a small business, whether it's a big business, multinational, whether it's government, right? Employees, you're selling to a variety of different retail channels. In the digital space, you get to manage that under one centralized platform, under one centralized inventory system. And we feel that, that our markets are going to kind of leapfrog in some ways where you're not kind of, do B2B, then 5 years later it goes into, B2C and then C2C. We think that brands today in Southeast Asia and our clients are actually looking at the B2All, right? And then companies like Samsung, for example, we started helping them with the B2E and the B2B, B2 employees, employee network. And then now, they're actually looking at how do I extend further outside of B2E, B2B, right? And obviously going to B2C, right? Mm-hmm. So the opportunity is very interesting out here in that kind of the companies, the way they, because the evolution of our market has been kind of post US, Europe, and China. And so they're kind of taking all these learnings and leapfrogging certain things. Where you look at mobile, 70%, 80% of the orders now are coming from mobile, right? And that's a kind of like interesting leapfrogging.
Skipping the desktop altogether. Yeah. Absolutely. Tell us a little bit, because I think there's an important story in there for the startup or for the startup founders wannabe that are listening to the podcast, as well as for people that just are interested to know. What was your fundraising strategy for aCommerce? Because you went through several rounds, and I think there's a lot of learnings for potentially regional startups who are on their journey to raise funds. Yeah,
so I mean, our advice and kind of fundraising strategy is that, obviously a lot of startups, they would like to raise as much as they can, right? But, if you can really articulate, exactly how much you're going to spend that specific amount of money. An example would be, let's just say I want to expand from one country into another country, and I need, let's just say, $2 million for that, right? So, you go out and say, I'm planning to expand, invest into tech and expand to a new market. I need 2 million, right? Now, how well you articulate that story is really what's going to get you additional funding on top of that too, right? And there's no better feeling than to be oversubscribed. So instead of going out and saying, look, I'm going to raise 6 million to expand into 3 countries, you're actually better off saying, look, I'm going to expand to 1 country with this 2 million. And if I get more, I might go into a new country. And what happens is that, once that 2 million is filled up, you kind of get that, fear of missing out, that FOMO, where other investors now want to in, and then you can actually get to the end result of 6 million, right? And maybe even more, right? So that would be my advice, which is make sure you really articulate how you plan to spend that too. And then if you can articulate incredibly well, if you're lucky, you can even get up to 10. Especially with how aggressive the investors are today.
Yes. So the fundamental is make sure your story is right?
Yes.
Story is key.
Yes, correct. And don't, aim too high, because some companies will really, the valuation, right? Mm-hmm. They will overvalue their business. And, it's actually, you have to also think about, do you actually want to, create a good deal for multiple different investors, so you get to actually also choose your investor versus kind of outpricing yourself of the market. And when you outprice, meaning your valuation's too high, it's very difficult to kind of go back with your tail tucked between your legs and go, oh, sorry about that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a science, but I would recommend that, actually to not, go too high, and to be in the very early stages, make sure that you actually find and get the right investor and, try to figure out what price is right for that investor that you want in.
Yeah. What are some of the key points the startups should master to successfully go regionally in Southeast Asia? Because that's a big thing. Again, coming back to each country is quite different. So what are some of the fundamentals that they need to get right before doing that?
Number one, if you are in one market and you're planning to expand, and let's say you have three or four services in that one market, right? What you really need to think about is, rather than just sign up all three or four services in another market, what you need to think about is what product or what service should you go into that market with that gives you that advantage, right? And then once you get that product going in that market, then you can scale up, into other products and services. So really figuring out what that playbook, you need the playbook. Choose which product first. So you do the market analysis, your research, and then you basically go, okay, which product is best for this market? And then you create the playbook, the processes, right? To be able to launch into that market. Once you launch in that market, and you're successful, then expand further, right? So don't kind of go in, trying to offer everything at once.
Don't spread yourself too thin.
Correct. And I think that, and then you'll even have the option of, do you want to go into a new market with that product, right? Or do you want to go deeper into that market, with just more services? So that's, I think, going to be depending on, the opportunity that you see.
Yes. Fair comment. You are an example of a Thai startup, right? Because you actually started in Thailand, in Bangkok. I think it was in the middle of a coup, wasn't it? Right. So there's a funny story in there. Did it help you that you started in Thailand? Would it have been easier to start somewhere else? I mean, what's your thoughts on that looking back?
Yes. Well, as a group of founders, we actually, myself and four other founders, we tend to believe that tackling harder markets create more value. Meaning that when you think about Thailand market, I think that Singapore and Malaysia are usually the typical markets that global companies will launch, right? For us, we felt that the Thailand market is a closed language market, so everything has to be very localized. And usually what's great about launching in markets like Thailand, which would be similar to, let's say, Japan or Korea, right, where it's a very closed language market, that, building a business and learning the nuances of localization, right, is valuable, right? And so as we built that out in Thailand, we immediately knew that Indonesia was going to be similar in that sense, right? So, but a much larger market. So we used Thailand, to really understand, knowing the nuances of kind of a localized language. Now, of course, as we expand into Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia, we tend to group that as like the English language speaking markets that I would say a little bit easier to launch with. And from that's like, let's say what we call our tier 2. And that's where, for some companies, it really depends on the capability of your team. If your team has experience with already, building companies in Southeast Asia, then you can, obviously go with the hard markets first, because I think that it gives you a competitive advantage. And even as you expand and get into, for example, markets like Singapore, you're actually you're a product in Singapore, meaning that Singapore companies tend to actually want to expand to Southeast Asia. So when you set up in Singapore, you're like, look, I have Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand. Most of our clients, especially out here, are asking, great, we'd love to work with you guys in those markets. Oh, by the way, do you have a local operations in Singapore as well? Or, of course, which we do today. But, selling Southeast Asia in Singapore is, what we have kind of a top-down sales strategy. Yes. Of course, we work also with local partners locally. But when you have top-down, bottom-up, it's incredibly, powerful.
Yes.
As a value proposition.
Yes. No, absolutely. What is, I don't know if you have one, but what is the exit strategy for aCommerce? What would be the result that makes you most happy? Because you've exited some companies, so will you do that, or will you build it to last, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's, I think as I've exited the various different companies, you learn a lot about, we were in models where we were absorbed completely into a business, and, we have to work within that, the corporate structure in some ways, or we were left independent. I think that, the options of today are incredible, right? So that means that, what's the ideal? The ideal, would be allowing some of the shareholders to be able to sell a little bit, right? and in the secondary market, because your business and your brand and your stock is valuable, right? Not just sell a little bit so people can either buy homes or buy cars. I'm talking about staff and whatnot. And then really you have the opportunity to go big, right? And so gone are the days where basically founders and employees, I think, will kind of have to be stuck in an organization until the exit, right? And sometimes that creates kind of unscalable or unhealthy behavior. And with the options today, with whether it's new investors buying existing investors, I think that there's a lot of options, and I think that companies today, they get those options and they weigh those options, I would say, on a quarterly basis. Because obviously, if the market gets incredibly competitive and, all of a sudden, you lose your number one lead and you become a number two or a number three, right? Merging with with your competitor, the number two and number three to take out number one might make sense. Or, selling to a bigger entity, a bigger corporation that can give you that, the backing, right? And then the funds and the infrastructure might also be the next option, right? So it really depends, what I think the timing of the market and what the market conditions are. I think every founder aspires to, take a company public, and see, kind of the baby grow into something much bigger. And that's always the dream. But from my perspective, it's that, I'm very much just laser focused at the moment on just getting us to profitability. Yeah. And then once you get to profitability, you basically have control of your destiny. Right. And I think that is where, really just very laser focused in on that. And once we get that, for us, it's in the horizon. And we've actually, as a B2B business, this bit much different than a B2C, but, it's really about getting to profitability. And then from there, I think that the sky is the limit and you have all the different options and you have even more options than you had before.
Yes. Yes. Very, very good sharing. Just to kind of add to that in terms of options, because we had on the podcast a few episodes ago, Ed, and Ed started a company called Yoji. And interestingly enough, what they did is, and I hadn't heard that before from anybody actually, what they did very early in the company life, they went public. So they went public, they listed it on the Australian Stock Exchange, and basically that, because you have to go, of course, through the due diligence and force them, one, to set up a very strong foundation for all their, due diligence processes, finances. So they forced them as a startup. Secondly, they gave the company a very solid, everything was open book, right, for the investors to put money. And now they have, of course, thousands of investors because it's listed on the stock exchange. So that was another option, a way to do things, which probably a few years ago would not even have been on the books. And now, as you rightfully said, there's quite a few instruments and alternatives available. It's just a matter of what makes more sense for the right time.
Yes, correct.
Let's talk a little bit about technology trends, e-commerce trends. Technology is obviously on everybody's lips. What do you see as the most prominent? There's a couple of things like blockchain, AI, you name it, right? But what do you see, especially in relation to aCommerce, especially in relation to e-commerce, and what you're doing as the main trends, and what are you investing in?
Yeah, no, when we just e-commerce in general, I think that, when you think about all the retailers, all the distributors, right? You just got to start thinking about, how do I defend against cross-border, right? The world is becoming more global, more open, right? And so, I do see that, I think there's a couple of trends where, as kind of the China market starts to open up globally, right? Companies have to really start to figure out, to change in some ways the value proposition, right? Meaning that in Southeast Asia, as you can see, the influx of Chinese goods, right? Cross-border from, with Alibaba, with Lazada acquisition, right? How do the local businesses, local conglomerates, right? Local companies, remain competitive, right? Especially with, all the products flooding the market. And I do feel that, companies in Southeast Asia are going to have to start to look at, the manufacturing, the OEMs out here. How can they start going global, right? Because, if they don't start owning the end customer directly, globally, right, it's going to be very challenging. And so I think that, just kind of on behalf of Southeast Asia and, how to make Southeast Asia more competitive, right? They really have to start to think about how to expand outside of just the regional or domestic market and start to go global. And for us, we have a lot of brands, enter the market. We're actually more inbound. Probably 95% of our business is inbound. But what we start to see now is that, there are few manufacturers that are going, hey, can you help me, expand to Rakuten Japan, Tmall China, right? Amazon US, right? Zalando, Germany, and, just all these different channels out there now, right? So as you start to build a brand, as you start to build a product anywhere in Southeast Asia, these companies have to start to think, how do they go global, right? To be really competitive. And so I think that, just being, living out here for 15 plus years, how can this region remain competitive? Because, a lot of companies are entering. What I find interesting is that also you got to understand that as you build businesses out here, in Southeast Asia, you have to think about, we don't just compete, for example, with, one country or a couple countries. In fact, the whole world is entering. You have Google, Facebook, Amazon, and, obviously Alibaba, JD.com, you got domestic players, you got Thai conglomerates, you got regional conglomerates, right? Obviously building businesses in these times are very, it's very interesting because, this is where for us, why we've exited 3 companies was, you actually have this opportunity to exit to local, regional, or global players, right? And these companies, the global players especially, either they have to build it themselves from scratch, right? Or they just buy their way in, right? And also similar with even conglomerates, right? That are, that don't have the capabilities of building technology. They are in very traditional businesses, right? Whether it's gas, palm oil, or, kind of real estate, right? These guys are going, look, we have to, how do they build the future industries of tomorrow, which is technology? And most of them are not equipped for that. So they themselves need to acquire their way in as well. So I think these are also great times for companies to build out here in Southeast Asia because, of the lack of that infrastructure, the lack of the tech, and the opportunity to be able to exit to local, regional, global players. It's a huge opportunity.
Yes. No, excellent point. Let's talk a little bit for a moment about people, right? It's key to any startup, it's key to any company in general, but even more so to startups. How do you hire people to join aCommerce? What are some of the top attributes you're looking for?
Really for us, it's, it's the match of the passion, the eagerness to learn, the curiosity. Our business is incredibly complex. You think about the industries that we tackle, marketing, retail, and logistics, right? What I think, really attracts, where we attract talent is also the complexity of that model, right? Meaning that, when you think about the logistics guys that, with, supply chain backgrounds, when they join our business, they actually don't just stay there. They're very curious about learning about distribution, learning about, B2C retailing, B2B retailing, and they get to move up the value chain. They get to learn, right? And all the way up to even marketing as well. And so we see some really, some guys that are eager to learn, all the way up, from they start in logistics and they go up to retail, and marketing. Then marketing guys, they also want to learn about logistics as well, right? So that's what's, I think, incredibly fascinating. I think, the new workforce of today, they're pretty savvy just because of the availability of information that they get online, so they can do all the research. And, I think that the most important thing, before even pitching investors, right, is actually being able to convince, these top talent to join your business, because when they look at your business model, they're like, wow, I think that there's a real business model here. I think there's a real need here. I think, that, if they have the autonomy to be able to not only help execute the existing products and services of today, but they know that they can actually build also new products and services of tomorrow and the future, right? That excites them, the ability to be able to build new products. And for us, businesses always have to keep innovating. And they know that in our business model, we always have to be innovating 2-3 steps ahead of everybody. right? And so, for example, we just launched a fairly recent marketing product called Brand IQ that really allows companies like, L'Oreal or these brands to be able to monitor across all the marketplaces, gray market goods, what's the average pricing, for that product, how much market share or digital share of shelf do they have, how much advertising or investment do they have to invest to grab more market share, right? So giving them a full visibility of, where their brand stands across, all these different channels, right? And so when you think about, marketing product like that, right? The guys that built that out were actually from the retail segment going, look, we need to know, we need to help our brands basically grow market. But how do we grow the market? What is the market, right? And so just from that question alone, our company goes, look, let's go build that, right? Because we need that solution for our brands. And so we just listen to our clients. And our clients are pretty big clients, right? That have pretty big problems, right? And, we just have to listen to them. But you also have to have the culture of being able to, execute and build on that. I'm not saying we got that right 100%, yes. But I think it's the, I think that the mission to solve these problems on behalf of our clients makes these guys, it's a very fluid, dynamic business to work in.
Yes.
And I think that they definitely learn a lot. I think some people can be overwhelmed in some sense, right? But, for us, it's, making sure that in order for us to build a really long-term solid business, we need to have this kind of mindset.
Yeah. I mean, as I think the CEO of Facebook said it, that if you're not breaking things, you're not moving fast enough. So definitely in a startup environment and in a fast growing environment, it's inevitable that you feel overwhelmed sometimes. But I think to your point, and it's a very good example. And again, you're working with very big brands, and the fact that you can adapt to their needs and can come up with a solution, I think it puts you in a very, very favorable spot, because typically those guys are not that flexible and are not able to shift the needle so fast, right? So then you address and you truly become a long-term partner for them. And you touched upon culture, right? So I think that's very important, and it's key. So you're the CEO of the company. You're one of the key drivers of the culture really in aCommerce. You mentioned things like flexibility, like adaptability. Any other key aspects of the culture, and is there a way in which you also consciously drive it?
I think that, just culturally, I think when you think about, being an entrepreneur, right, and having that founder mentality, right, which is to solve problems, right? So when you have, when you're solving problems for clients, for example, right, that is the most important thing for us as a business, right, to really help these clients succeed. So even, in that applies to entrepreneurship, that what problems are you solving? Because some companies will build products that really, don't have a user case. And those are some of the challenges. They're kind of like just guess, right? And so for us, we're kind of fairly fortunate in this business model to have where we're actually to solve problems. But also I think it's important that to be curious, but as well as also humble, right? Because sometimes I think that, the big challenge is when you when you work in a very kind of fast-paced, dynamic environment, right? That, sometimes, managing egos, managing, really big personalities, no one wants to work with jerks, right? And so I think that it's really important for us that, when there are jerks in our business, that we make sure that we weed them out. And it's because, we all have to work hard. We don't want to work hard and have to deal with jerks. And I think that is so important, where, you have to make, hard decisions. And so sometimes to, get the organization to where it is today, and everyone has to be synced up, right? And so to have a pleasant working environment, and where you can lean on your teammates, and rely on people, and know that, that they're also friends as well as colleagues, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And that teamwork environment is incredibly, and I think that, the people look for that leadership, even by how the C-levels and executives actually communicate and work with each other, or even sometimes, like openly argue in front and in a healthy and kind of debatable way. But at the end of the day, it's about getting the best result. It's not about, I hate the word seniority, right? Because, this word seniority for me is like, that really kind of oppresses opinions, right? And so you want to be able to have any person in the organization, whatever role, to be able to go, hey, I'm spotting a problem here, right? And if you kind of, drown that out, your organization is going to get into trouble.
Yes, yes. Are there certain leadership principles that you follow?
I mean, some, I would say, just on top of my head, for principles, what do you mean by principle?
Like, I don't know, it's like, there's certain, that guy Peter Drucker, and I mean,
Sure.
I might be oversaying it when I say principle, but strategy, culture is strategy for breakfast, or in terms of leading teams, or in terms of getting the best out of people. Are there certain on your mind? Because I think you rightfully mentioned actually a few. You mentioned about teamwork. You mentioned about forget seniority. It's more about getting stuff done, solving problems. Opening up and speaking. I mean, I think all of these are actually principles if you think about it. But I was just thinking if there's some like almost like a mantra that you try to.
I mean, yes, we definitely have that, kind of the values in the business. But for me, I think that, it's really, when you think about the organization as a whole and how the culture, when you think about where does culture come from, it's actually, how you're executing a business model, right? So when you think about how complex a business model itself, let's just say it's the concept of a business, the business model concept, right? How you execute that, right? It determines also what kind of culture that you build, right? So when you think about like our one of our mantras is like client first. So the way we think about it is that, we won't have an organization if the clients aren't there, right? And so the next of that would be the team, right? And the last is the company, right? Because, the team has to obviously, support, the clients. And so because of that core principle for us, it's really all about, how do we make the client happy? How do we solve the client problems? From that perspective, this is where we come up with our new products, our new services. Clients are open and share with us, right? And also, making sure that, the level of customer service that we provide, making sure internally, the teamwork that's able to support that, because sometimes clients are very, obviously, they're very demanding, right? I think that in a kind of vendor model, right, it's actually, the expectations of the vendor, it's hard, when there's something that goes wrong, it's almost like double the pain, right? Because you're representing the client to the customer, right? And so so that's where like getting that right is incredibly important. So for us, the customer first is definitely one of our core values.
Yes. Final question: What would be the top advice you would share with somebody who wants to embark on the journey of entrepreneurship?
I think that you have to, I would say, prepare for kind of really kind of difficult and hard times, right? I mean, obviously, it has the benefits but you got to think about I would say relentless and perseverance, right? And those are, I would say traits that are so important in an entrepreneur, because we will always run into walls, right? And trying to figure out how to climb that wall, punch through that wall, break through that wall. It's important, right? And I think that, you have to have kind of that, that level of perseverance, but also the support structure, right? Support meaning that, if you have family, if you have friends, right? Even, co-founders, it's important to have not only, kind of financial support, right? But actually the emotional support. So, because I think that a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize how grueling sometimes it can be. And, certain things catch up to them. And, rather than kind of, being burnt out and fall apart, right? You need constantly to be able to read that I'm going through this hardship. Who can I consult with? Who can I advise with, right? And that support mechanism is incredibly important, right? Some people will have mentors, some people will have family, right? Some people will have friends, colleagues, co-founders. And so for me, it was incredibly important to just have a very strong founding team, right? And instead of, being kind of the lone founder, and I actually tend to invest into companies that have a good support structure because, just by having 2 or 3 founders, it's incredibly important to have sparring partners, especially, when you're going to war or building a business.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I mean, share the load, right? Share the load a little bit and push each other further because it's
exactly.
It's not. I mean, it's a recurring theme. We've had a few entrepreneurs on the podcast, and I think it's a recurring theme that, I mean, it is super tough. Also, we obviously deal a lot with senior executives in big corporations, and some of them are candidates, and they complain, sometimes they tell me, Radu, I'm fed up with the corporate world, I wish I would start on my own. But I think a lot of them don't realize. I think they over I don't know what's the word. Basically, they think that it's such a glamorous journey, right, to be an entrepreneur, and actually it's probably the hardest thing you can possibly do. So it's.
And we hired a fair bit of corporate guys, and as they enter the organization, they're like, wow, you don't have this administrative support, or you don't have this. You're like, well, can you build it then? And that, I think it'll actually take a year or a year plus. My advice to any, guys in the kind of the corporate world, instead of kind of before you actually do your own startup, I would recommend joining a startup, maybe mid-size, so you can start to kind of get the hang of it, and learn before actually really diving into the deep end. But at the same time, I've also kind of read research that when you're actually in a business and you've thought about building your own startup, the 35 to 40% of successful startups came from basically founders that were employed while they were, kind of thinking of their next business, right? And they actually spent a year to 2 years before they launched that. And the reason why is because they've thought of all the problems before they've actually jumped ship. And I think that vetting, that process, rather than kind of just jumping ship, right? They have thoroughly thought it through. The likely chance of success was actually 40% higher chance of success.
Yes.
So, it really depends on, I think, what stage you are in your life.
Yes. Super. Well, Paul, many thanks. Really great sharing, great advice, great tips. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for the lessons. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we wish aCommerce a smooth and great journey ahead.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to follow us on radupalamario.com/podcast for all the show notes, links, and extra tips covered in the interview. Make sure also to subscribe to our emailing list to get the news in the nick of time. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes or Stitcher and you like what we do, please kindly review and give us 5 stars so we can keep the energy flowing and get more people to find out about our podcast. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me to stay tuned for our latest articles as well as future guests for the podcast. And if you have any suggestions or any other idea, please feel free to write to me. I respond to all. And also, please make sure not to miss our next episode, where we will be having a few other C-level and top leaders in supply chain joining us. Stay tuned.